The alarm did not come from a machine. It came from a child screaming behind a locked glass door. The sound ripped through the upper floor of the Harrington estate at 12:41 in the morning, sharp and raw, the kind of sound that makes trained security men freeze mid-step. Red lights flared silently along the hallway ceiling. Magnetic locks sealed. Cameras tilted, adjusted, recorded. Somewhere deep inside the system, an algorithm classified the scream as medical distress level, critical. Daniel Harrington was already awake. He stood barefoot on the cold concrete floor of his private control room, eyes fixed on the wall of screens. His breath was steady. His face was not. On the central monitor, his son Miles thrashed in bed, thin arms, flailing oxygen monitor blinking amber. In the adjacent bed, his twin brother Caleb sat upright, frozen hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "Do not touch him," the night nurse said over the intercom, her voice too fast. "We're waiting for clearance." Daniel did not answer. He watched Miles' chest stutter. Watched Caleb's eyes dart to the ceiling cameras instead of the adults in the room. Watched fear bloom and harden into something older than a child should ever carry. Daniel pressed his palm against the glass. The system hummed, loyal, obedient. This house had been designed to withstand earthquakes, cyber attacks, intrusions both human and biological. Every surface sterilized, every movement tracked, every risk reduced to probability, and still his son was breaking apart. "Clear the room," Daniel said finally. His voice was low, controlled, edged with steel. The nurse hesitated. "Sir Protocol, clear it." The line went dead. On screen, the nurse backed away. The door slid shut. Locks engaged. Now it was just the boys. Alone, surrounded by technology worth more than most hospitals in the country. And still screaming. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. In that darkness, something else surfaced. Not fear, not panic, anger. Because this was not supposed to happen. He had built his life to make sure it never happened. Daniel Harrington did not lose control. Not in boardrooms, not in courtrooms, not when federal regulators tried to dismantle his company or when senators demanded answers under oath. He was known for calm, for precision, for decisions that landed like verdicts. They said he ran Harrington Biotech like a war room and a cathedral at the same time. What they did not say was why. 8 years earlier, his wife had died in a delivery room 3 states away from this house. A rare complication. A perfect storm. Doctors had spoken in soft voices and past tense verbs. Daniel had stood very still, his hands empty, his future rearranged without consent. The twins survived. One strong, one fragile. Miles had come into the world with a genetic condition that turned light into pain and infections into threats. Caleb had come into the world watching adapting learning fear early. Daniel had sworn an oath that night alone in a hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and loss. Nothing will touch them again. That oath had become architecture. The estate sat on the edge of Northern California like a fortress pretending to be a home. Bullet-resistant glass. Climate-controlled air. Medical staff on rotation. A private lab downstairs. A server core beneath the West Wing that monitored everything from oxygen saturation to emotional variance. The boys were safe. That was the math. But math did not explain the scream. Daniel opened his eyes and scanned the screens again. Something new flickered at the edge of one camera feed. A shadow near the service corridor. Motion flagged, but not escalated. He enlarged the frame. A woman stood there. She was not supposed to be on this floor. She wore gray scrubs and soft shoes. No badge visible. Her hair was pulled back too tight, as if she were afraid it might escape. She stood perfectly still, hands folded at her waist, eyes lowered. Daniel recognized her instantly. Her name was Grace Monroe, 32 years old, recently hired through a third-party facilities contractor, night shift cleaning, minimal interaction, zero clearance near the children. He had signed that restriction himself. "What is she doing there?" Daniel asked. Security hesitated. "She hasn't crossed the boundary line, sir. She's just standing." On screen, Grace did something strange. She sat down, not near the door, not near the glass. She lowered herself onto the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn in slightly, as if making herself small. From her pocket, she took out a folded piece of fabric, dark blue, old, softened by time. She unfolded it once, then again, slowly, carefully, each movement deliberate. Inside the room, Miles screamed louder. His body arched. Caleb slid off his bed and pressed his hands against the glass eyes, wide, desperate. Grace did not move toward them. She spoke. The microphones barely picked it up. Her voice was low, steady, almost calm enough to be dangerous. "It's okay to breathe fast," she said. "Your body is trying to protect you. It thinks it's helping." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Who authorized her to speak?" he snapped. "No one, sir." Grace kept talking. "But you're safe right now. You can tell your chest to slow down. Just a little. You don't have to win. You just have to stay." Miles' screaming hitched. The sound fractured, became sobbing. Then breath. Uneven, still fast, but human. Caleb turned his head. He wasn't looking at the cameras anymore. He was looking at her. Daniel felt something shift behind his ribs. Not relief. Not yet. Suspicion. Because this was not care. This was not training. This was not protocol. This was instinct. And instinct had no place in his house. Grace fell silent. She did not look up, did not check the glass. She simply folded the cloth again, tucking it back into her pocket, and stood. Then she walked away. Inside the room, Miles collapsed against the bed, exhausted. The monitors eased from amber to green. Caleb slid down beside his brother, one small hand gripping the other. The house exhaled. Daniel did not. He stared at the empty corridor where Grace had been his reflection, faint in the glass. The system had worked. Technically. The crisis had passed, but nothing about this felt controlled. "Who is she?" Daniel asked quietly. Security pulled up her file. Sparse. Too sparse. Grace Monroe. Born in Missouri. No emergency contact listed. Previous work, hospice cleaning services, assisted living facilities, 2 pediatric wards. Short contracts. No incidents. No complaints. No family. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. And no explanation. Somewhere down the hall, a woman who scrubbed floors for a living had calmed his son when millions of dollars of technology could not. Daniel Harrington did not believe in coincidences. And for the first time in years, he felt something more dangerous than fear creep into his chest. Curiosity. By morning, the house pretended nothing had happened. Sunlight filtered through layered glass designed to soften glare, turning the long corridors pale and quiet. The alarms were silent, the locks disengaged. The estate returned to its carefully rehearsed rhythm. Nurses rotated out. Fresh air cycled in. Breakfast trays moved on wheels that did not squeak. Daniel Harrington did not sleep. He sat at the head of the breakfast table, untouched coffee cooling near his right hand, eyes moving not between his sons, but between the people around them. Miles ate slowly, shoulders hunched careful with each breath, as if his body were something unreliable. Caleb watched everyone else instead of his plate, cataloging movements, expressions, exits. They were calmer, too calm. Daniel noticed everything. The way Miles did not flinch when a sunbeam slipped across the table. The way Caleb's jaw unclenched for the first time in weeks. The way both boys ate, without the constant background tremor of panic. Medication adjustment, Daniel asked, his voice casual, almost bored. "No change, sir," said Dr. Elaine Porter, flipping through her tablet. "Same dosage, same schedule, vitals stabilized naturally overnight." Naturally. Daniel's gaze slid unhurried toward the far end of the room, where Grace Monroe stood beside the service counter, wiping an already clean surface. She kept her head down. Always did. Her posture suggested apology rather than presence, as if she were borrowing space she did not deserve. "Did she interact with them this morning?" Daniel asked. The head of household operations, Victor Lang, answered too quickly. "Absolutely not. She followed protocol. No proximity. No engagement." Grace did not look up. Daniel took a sip of coffee. It tasted like nothing. After breakfast, he watched the boys through the glass of his office wall as they moved into the play area. Miles chose the corner where shadows pooled. Caleb dragged 2 chairs close together, forming a barrier without being told. Their world was small, contained learned through repetition and consequence. Daniel turned back to his desk. A stack of briefings waited, blinking with urgency. A federal inquiry, a hostile acquisition attempt, a software breach flagged overnight in one of Harrington Biotech's overseas labs. Any other day, these would have commanded his full attention. Today, they did not. "Pull footage from last night," he said to the room. The screens shifted. Time rewound. 12:37 in the morning. 12:40. 12:41. There she was again. Grace, sitting on the floor, speaking softly, folding the cloth. Daniel replayed it without sound this time. He watched her hands. They did not shake. They moved with certainty, like someone following a map only she could see. "Zoom in," he said. The image tightened. The cloth in her hands came into focus. Old cotton, edges worn smooth, the kind of thing people kept long after it stopped being useful. "Why bring that to work?" Daniel murmured. Victor shifted behind him. "Sir, nothing." Daniel closed the file and stood. His reflection followed him across the glass as he walked out of the office and into the hallway. Staff straightened instinctively. Conversations died mid-word. This house knew the sound of his steps. Grace was in the linen room, folding towels with mathematical precision. She did not notice him until he spoke. Grace. Her shoulders tensed. She turned slowly, eyes, downcast hands, still holding the towel as if it might anchor her. "Yes, sir." "You were on the upper floor last night." Her throat moved. "Yes." "You know that area is restricted." "Yes." "Why were you there?" A pause. Not long, but intentional. "I was cleaning the east corridor," she said. "I heard something." "What did you hear?" "A child crying." Daniel studied her face. No drama, no pleading. No attempt to justify. "And you decided to speak to him." "I didn't speak to him, sir. I spoke near him." "That is not an answer." Grace lifted her eyes just enough to meet the space beneath his chin, not his gaze. It was a practiced angle, one learned from years of trying not to be noticed. "I didn't cross the line," she said. "I know the rules. You also know that my rules exist for a reason, yes?" Daniel waited. Silence pressed in, heavy and deliberate. "Why did you do it?" he asked. Grace hesitated, just long enough for something to flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or memory? "Because he needed someone to stay calm," she said quietly. Daniel felt a sharp edge of irritation. "You are not trained medical staff." "No. You are not authorized to intervene in any psychological or physiological episode involving my children. No, sir. Then explain to me why it worked. Grace's fingers tightened around the towel. She folded it once more before setting it down. I don't think he needed fixing, she said. I think he needed time. That answer landed harder than Daniel expected. Time, Daniel repeated. Time is what kills people. Grace did not argue. She did not retreat either. Sometimes, she said, it's the lack of time that makes it worse. Daniel stepped closer. The air between them changed. You don't know anything about my sons. Grace swallowed. I know what it sounds like when someone is terrified and trying to breathe at the same time. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And how would you know that? Another pause, this one longer. I've heard it before, she said, where her gaze dropped again. Somewhere else. Daniel could have pressed. He was very good at pressing. Entire careers had folded under less scrutiny. Instead, he straightened. You will not go near them again, he said. This is your only warning. Grace nodded. Understood. He turned to leave. Halfway down the hall, he stopped. Grace. She looked up. If I find out you crossed another boundary, you will be escorted off the property immediately. I understand, she said. Her voice did not shake. Daniel walked away, his spine rigid, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Grace exhaled. The rest of the day unraveled in quiet defiance. The boys refused their afternoon therapy session for the first time. Miles curled inward when the specialist approached. Caleb stepped in front of him without speaking. No, Caleb said. Flat. Certain. Dr. Porter frowned. This is non-compliance. Daniel watched from the observation room as his son stood his ground, small but unmovable. What do you want instead? Daniel asked through the speaker. Caleb hesitated. His eyes flicked just once toward the service corridor. We want to sit on the floor, he said, like last night. Daniel's chest tightened. With who? Dr. Porter asked gently. Caleb shook his head. Doesn't matter. It mattered. Daniel ended the session. That evening, Victor approached him with unease etched into his features. Sir Therese, something you should see. He led Daniel to a secondary monitor feed. The angle was different. Older cameras, less refined. It showed the garden courtyard at dusk. Grace sat on a stone bench alone, the blue cloth spread across her lap. She wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking. She was staring at the sky, lips moving as if counting something invisible. She arrives early every day, Victor said. Leaves late. She never logs the extra time. Daniel said nothing. She doesn't interact with anyone unless spoken to. The other staff barely notice her. Daniel watched Grace fold the cloth again. Once, twice, 3 times, always the same. Why that cloth? Daniel asked. Victor hesitated. I don't know. Daniel did. Not the answer. But the weight of it. That night, the alarms did not sound, but Daniel stayed awake anyway, watching the darkened hallway on his screens. Grace did not go near the children's room. She stopped several feet away, sat down, leaned back against the wall, and waited. Daniel realized with a slow, unsettling clarity that she wasn't watching the boys. She was listening. And whatever she was listening for, she trusted it more than any system he had built. The first complaint came from someone Daniel did not expect to complain at all. Caleb stopped speaking. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just small refusals at first. A nod instead of a word. A shake of the head where sentences used to be. By afternoon, his answers vanished completely. When Dr. Porter asked how he felt, he stared at the wall. When the nurse asked if he wanted water, he didn't look up. When Daniel knelt in front of him and said his name, Caleb's eyes flicked past him, searching for something Daniel could not see. Miles noticed. That was the dangerous part. Miles had learned early that attention could be costly. He spoke less, moved carefully, treated his body like glass. But now, with Caleb silent, Miles started filling the space with shallow breaths and nervous movements, fingers worrying at his sleeves, eyes darting to the ceiling cameras, like they might intervene. Daniel ended the afternoon schedule early. "Clear the house," he said. "No sessions tonight. Dr." Porter hesitated. "Sir, regression is common at this stage. Pulling back services may reinforce. I said, clear it." By sunset, the estate felt hollowed out. Staff moved quietly, unsure. Dinner went untouched. The boys sat on the floor of the living room, instead of the table backs against the couch shoulders, pressed together like they were bracing for impact. Daniel sat across from them, long legs, stretched out hands, resting open on his knees. He tried to soften his voice. "Talk to me, Caleb." Silence. Miles glanced at his brother, then whispered, "He doesn't want to say it. Say what Miles swallowed. He thinks if he says it, you'll take it away." Daniel's jaw tightened. Take what Miles didn't answer. He couldn't. He didn't have the words. Only the feeling, and feelings were dangerous things in this house. They were unpredictable, uncontainable. Daniel stood. "I'll be back," he said, and left the room before either child could respond. He walked the corridors with purpose-passing glass walls and muted lights until he reached the service wing. The air smelled different there, less filtered, more human. Grace was in the storage room, inventorying supplies by hand, instead of using the tablet issued to her. A pen, a paper list, old habits. She froze when she saw him. "Sir? Why did my son stop speaking?" Daniel asked. Grace blinked. "I don't know. Don't lie to me." She held his gaze this time, fully. Her eyes were steady, but something raw moved behind them. "I am not lying." "Then tell me what you do know." Grace looked down at the paper in her hands, folded it, unfolded it, then set it aside. "Hez holding something," she said. "And he doesn't trust that it's safe to let go." Daniel felt irritation spike. This was psychology masquerading as intuition. Dangerous. Unregulated. "You've been influencing them," he said. Grace shook her head. "I haven't asked them for anything." "You don't have to ask to influence," Daniel snapped. "Presence is influence." "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." That admission landed wrong. Too calm. Too certain. Daniel stepped closer. "You think you understand them better than the people trained to keep them alive?" "No," Grace said. "I think I understand what it feels like to be watched when you're already afraid." Daniel's chest tightened. "You're projecting." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe they're telling the truth in the only way they know how." He stared at her, measuring. This woman had no credentials that mattered to him, no authority, no clearance. And yet his house was shifting around her in ways he did not like and could not quantify. "You will stop whatever you're doing," Daniel said, "effective immediately." Grace nodded. "I never started." That night, Daniel reviewed her file again. Deeper this time. Not the sanitized summary, but the gaps, the short contracts, the abrupt ends, hospice, pediatric wards, burn units. Always the same pattern. She stayed until the worst part passed, then left before anyone could ask her to stay. He noticed something else. Every placement coincided with a death. Not negligence, not fault. Timing. Grace Monroe did not arrive to save people. She arrived to sit with them while they fell apart. Daniel shut the file and leaned back, eyes burning. At 2:17 in the morning, the system flagged an anomaly. Not a medical alert. Not A security breach. A camera went dark. Daniel was on his feet before the notification finished processing. Which camera, he demanded. Service Corridor 7. Security replied. It's strange, sir. It didn't fail. It was manually covered. Daniel's pulse thudded. He pulled up the feed. Black screen. Then another angle. Grace stood beneath the camera arm raised, pressing a folded cloth gently over the lens. Not ripping it out. Not damaging it. Just blocking the view. She turned, walked 6 steps, and sat down against the wall outside the boys' room. Daniel's breath caught. Unlock the corridor, he said. Sir Protocol, unlock it. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Daniel moved through the house, without shoes, without hesitation. The hallway was dim, lit only by low safety lights. Grace sat exactly where the screen had shown her. The blue cloth lay folded beside her. She looked up as he approached. You shouldn't be here, Daniel said. Neither should you, she replied. Why did you cover the camera? Grace's voice was calm, because they needed one place where nothing was watching. That is not your decision. No, she said, but it was theirs. Daniel's voice dropped. My sons are not allowed unsupervised spaces. She nodded. I know. Then why? Because fear needs privacy, Grace said, and so does trust. Daniel felt something crack inside him. Anger surged, sharp and dangerous. You don't get to decide how my children learn trust. Grace stood slowly. Her hands were empty, her posture open. They already have, she said. They just didn't choose you. The words hit like a physical blow. Before Daniel could respond, the door behind them opened a fraction. Caleb stood there. He looked smaller in the low light, pale, barefoot. His eyes moved between them, assessing. If you make her leave, he said softly, I won't talk again. Daniel froze. Miles appeared behind him, fingers gripping the doorframe. He didn't speak. He just nodded. The house seemed to hold its breath. Daniel knelt. His knees hit the floor hard. Caleb, he said carefully, you don't get to threaten silence like that. Caleb's chin lifted. It's not a threat. It's the truth. Daniel turned to Grace. Fury and disbelief tangled together. What did you tell them? Grace shook her head. Nothing they didn't already know. Which is that you're scared, she said, and that you don't know how to sit still with it. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. Get away from them. Grace stepped back, 1 step, then another. I will, she said. But not because you're afraid, because they asked me to. She turned to the boys. Both nodded solemn. Grace picked up the cloth, folded it once, twice, 3 times. She handed it to Caleb. He took it without hesitation. Daniel watched powerless as something ancient and human passed between them without permission. Grace walked past him, her shoulder brushing his sleeve. He felt the contact like a shock. At the end of the corridor, she stopped. For what it's worth, she said, not turning around, control doesn't keep people alive. It just keeps them quiet. Then she disappeared into the dark. Daniel remained on the floor, staring at his sons, who now stood closer together than ever. For the first time since his wife died, Daniel Harrington understood that the greatest threat to his children was not the world outside his walls. It was the fear he had built into the walls themselves. The termination order was drafted before sunrise. Daniel sat alone in his office, the glass walls dimmed to opacity. The house still wrapped in the kind of early morning silence that made even powerful men feel exposed. On his screen, Grace Monroe's name hovered above a block of legal language, written to sound neutral, procedural, unavoidable. Unauthorized interference. Breach of security protocol. Psychological boundary violation. Each phrase clean, each one sharp. He did not sign it. Instead, he watched the corridor feed again. Not the moment she covered the camera. Not the confrontation. He rewound further, slower, frame by frame. He watched Grace's approach, the way she paused before sitting, the way she angled her body so she never blocked the doorway, the way she stayed low, non-threatening hands, visible palms open, not hiding, waiting. Daniel leaned back, fingers, steepled jaw tight. He had spent a lifetime reading people who wanted something from him. Investors leaned forward, lawyers watched his mouth, politicians measured his silences. Grace did none of that. She took up space like someone who expected to be asked to leave. By 8 a.m, the boys were awake. No alarms, no distress, no regression. Miles sat on the floor with a puzzle, his hands steady. Caleb stood at the window, tracing shapes in the condensation with one finger. When Daniel entered, they looked up at him at the same time. "Is she gone?" Caleb asked. Daniel hesitated. "Not yet." Caleb nodded, once satisfied. Miles exhaled. That reaction unsettled Daniel more than fear ever had. He left the room and found Victor waiting near the stairs, his expression carefully neutral. Sir Human Resources flagged the termination order. They're asking for confirmation. Daniel nodded. "Hold it." Victor blinked. "Sir, I said, hold it." Victor lowered his voice. "With respect, sir, she crossed multiple non-negotiable boundaries. If this were anyone else, she's not anyone else," Daniel said sharply. "Not anymore." Victor hesitated. "Sir, are you saying saying I want to understand the damage before I decide how to contain it?" Victor inclined his head and backed away. The day unfolded like a quiet mutiny. The boys refused to use the monitored playroom. They dragged cushions into the sunroom, creating a low fort that blocked direct light and cameras alike. When staff attempted to redirect them, Caleb spoke again, clearly this time. "No, one word. Absolute. Dr. Porter requested an emergency consult. Daniel declined. Instead, he requested something else. Bring Grace Monroe to the South Conference Room," he said. Now. Grace arrived 10 minutes later, escorted but unrestrained. She wore the same gray uniform, the same closed posture, but her eyes were alert, tracking every detail as she entered the glass-walled space overlooking the garden. "You wanted to see me, sir." Daniel gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She did. "Why did you choose that spot in the hallway?" Daniel asked without preamble. Grace folded her hands in her lap. It was the quietest place near them that still left them control over the door. "You planned that." She nodded. "Yes." "Why?" "Because panic gets worse when people feel cornered." Daniel's fingers tightened on the armrest. "And how would you know that Grace did not answer immediately?" When she did, her voice was softer. "Because I watched it happen once, and I couldn't stop it." Daniel waited. He did not interrupt. "My younger brother," she said. "He used to sleep in the hallway outside my room when he was scared. He said the door felt safer if it stayed open." Daniel's chest constricted. "You told me you wouldn't project," he said. "I didn't," Grace replied. "I recognized." "Recognition is bias, or it's pattern recognition," she said. "The kind your company makes billions selling." Daniel flinched. "You researched me." "No," she said. "I listened." Silence pressed in. "You covered a camera," Daniel said. "That is not listening." Grace met his gaze. That camera wasn't protecting them. It was reminding them they were never alone. They aren't alone. "They feel like they are," she said, "even when the room is full." Daniel stood restless. "You don't get to rewrite my house." "I didn't," Grace said. "I just showed them one corner where the rules loosened. That corner is a liability." Grace shook her head. "Fear is the liability. Control is just how it hides." Daniel's voice dropped. "You're very comfortable judging me." "I'm not judging you," she said. "I'm describing you." He stopped pacing. "Describe me." Grace inhaled slowly. "You built a system to protect what you love. But systems don't grieve. People do. And grief doesn't follow rules." Daniel's expression hardened. "You think I'm grieving?" Grace nodded. "I think you never stopped." He turned away. "End of discussion," Daniel said. "You will be reassigned to a different wing. No contact with the children. If you violate that again, you will be terminated immediately." Grace accepted it without protest. "Understood." She stood to leave. "Grace." She paused. "If my sons ask for you," Daniel said carefully, "what will you do?" Grace considered. "I'll ask them what they need." That wasn't the answer he wanted. She left. That evening, Miles had another episode. Not screaming. Worse. He went still. His breathing slowed too much. His eyes unfocused. The monitors chirped softly, then escalated. Dr. Porter rushed in. Nurses followed. Procedures activated. Daniel stood in the doorway, heart hammering. Miles did not respond. Caleb backed away, hands shaking. "Where is she?" he whispered. Daniel's throat closed. Sir Dr. Porter said urgently, "We need to stabilize him." "Do it," Daniel snapped. "Then quieter find Grace." She arrived breathless, escorted by security eyes already scanning Miles' body. She didn't touch him. She sat on the floor. "Miles," she said softly, "stay with me." Nothing. Caleb dropped beside her. He pressed the blue cloth into her hands. Grace unfolded it. Once, twice. Miles' eyes flickered. "You don't have to go anywhere," Grace murmured. "Just listen." The monitor steadied, slowly, reluctantly. Daniel watched from the doorway, powerless. When it was over, Grace stood. She turned to Daniel. "You can fire me now," she said. "But if you do, they'll survive. They always do. What they won't do is forget who stayed when it mattered." Daniel's hands curled into fists. "Get out," he said. Grace left. Daniel stood alone with his sons and the quiet hum of machines that had failed him again. He did not sign the termination order that night. Instead, he stared at the blank space where Grace Monroe's name glowed on his screen and realized something he had never allowed himself to consider. If she was wrong, she was dangerous. But if she was right, everything he had built was. Daniel Harrington ordered the internal audit at 5:16 in the morning. Not a security audit, not a medical review. An internal behavioral audit, the kind his company used when a system failed without throwing an error. When something kept working on paper while collapsing in reality. He sat alone at the long dining table, suit jacket draped over the chair beside him. Sleeves rolled up, veins visible in his forearms. The house was awake in fragments. A nurse moving quietly down the hall. A ventilation system cycling air. Somewhere a child shifting in sleep. Daniel tapped the table once. Pull everything he said to the system. Behavioral logs. Environmental triggers. Emotional variance markers. Cross-reference with staff movement for the past 30 days. The screens came alive. Graphs bloomed. Lines rose and fell. Spikes appeared where panic should not have existed. Gaps formed where intervention should have worked. Daniel leaned forward. There it was. Every major escalation in Miles' condition over the past month shared one common factor. Not light exposure, not allergens, not missed medication windows, isolation. The spikes clustered around moments of enforced separation. Therapy sessions that removed Caleb from the room. Medical interventions that prioritized procedure over presence. Nights when staff rotated too quickly, leaving unfamiliar faces. And then there was the anomaly. Grace Monroe. Where her presence appeared in the data, panic shortened, recovery accelerated, regression softened instead of deepened. The system flagged it as correlation, not causation. Daniel knew better. He pushed back from the table and stood the chair scraping softly against the floor. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had a week ago, not tired, weathered, as if something had been eroding him from the inside and only now was visible on the surface. He had built Harrington Biotech on the premise that human behavior could be predicted, optimized, corrected. His algorithms mapped fear responses in emergency rooms, optimized trauma protocols, reduced mortality rates across 3 continents. His company saved lives by removing chaos. And yet, in his own house, chaos had found a foothold. Daniel walked the halls until he reached the boys' room. He stopped outside the door. No cameras inside now. He had ordered them disabled after the last episode citing maintenance. Inside, Miles slept curled inward, the blue cloth tucked under his chin. Caleb lay beside him on the floor, one arm flung protectively across his brother's chest. Daniel did not enter. He leaned his forehead against the doorframe and closed his eyes. For the first time since his wife's funeral, the image of her came uninvited. Not in a hospital bed, not pale, but laughing hair, damp from the ocean, kneeling to build a sand castle with their sons before they had names. You can't protect them from everything she had said once. He had smiled then, confident, wrong. Footsteps approached softly behind him. Daniel straightened. Grace stood at the end of the hall, having clearly been summoned without being told why. She wore the same uniform, the same posture. But something in her face had changed, less guarded, more resigned. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Daniel nodded. "Walk with me." They moved side by side down the corridor, their steps echoing faintly against the polished floor. No escorts, no security. Just the 2 of them in the long, quiet spine of the house. "Why do you leave places right after the worst is over?" Daniel asked without looking at her. Grace blinked. "I don't. Your employment history says otherwise." She exhaled slowly. "Because people don't need me when things start getting better." That wasn't an answer. Grace stopped walking. Daniel stopped too. When the crisis ends, she said, people want explanations. They want hope. They want to know it won't happen again. I can't give them that. Daniel turned to face her. "And you think I can—" "No," she said. "I think you pretend you can." The words landed clean, sharp, honest. Daniel felt the familiar surge of anger rise then stall. There was no insult in her tone, no challenge, just statement. "You believe fear should be allowed to exist unchecked," he said. Grace shook her head. "I believe fear should be witnessed." Daniel scoffed. "That's not treatment. It's the first step of it." They resumed walking. "If I allow you continued access to my children," Daniel said, choosing each word carefully, "you will be subjected to oversight, monitoring, documentation, every interaction logged." Grace nodded. "That's fair. You will not touch them without explicit consent." "Understood. You will not contradict medical staff." "I won't undermine them," she said, "but I will speak if silence causes harm." Daniel stopped again. "That is not negotiable." Grace met his eyes. "Then neither is my answer." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Daniel looked away first. "Fine," he said. "Provisional status, limited hours. You stay, for now." Grace did not smile. "Thank you. This is not gratitude," Daniel warned. "This is containment." Grace's voice was soft. "Sometimes containment is the kindness people need." That afternoon, Daniel sat in on a therapy session for the first time in months. Miles sat on the floor, the blue cloth spread across his lap. Caleb leaned against the wall, watching. Dr. Porter knelt nearby, tablet set aside. Grace sat at a distance back, against the opposite wall. Silent. Present. "Tell me what you're feeling," Dr. Porter said gently. Miles shrugged. He didn't look up. Caleb spoke. "He's scared the quiet will disappear." Daniel stiffened. "What quiet?" Dr. Porter asked. Caleb gestured around the room. "The kind where nobody makes you explain." Dr. Porter glanced at Daniel, uncertain. Grace spoke carefully. "You don't have to explain quiet. You just have to notice when it's gone." Miles nodded. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. Unfamiliar, uncomfortable. Later, as the boys rested, Dr. Porter pulled Daniel aside. "This is unconventional," she said, "but the data supports it. Emotional regulation improves with consistent, non-intrusive presence." Daniel almost laughed. "That's not how we phrase it at the company." She met his gaze. "Maybe that's the problem." That evening, Daniel found Grace in the garden, sitting on the low stone wall, as dusk settled. She held the cloth loosely now, not folded, not hidden. "You stayed," Daniel said. Grace nodded. "You asked me to." He hesitated. "I don't know how long this will work." Grace looked up at the darkening sky. "Neither do I." "Why do you do this?" Daniel asked. "Really?" Grace's fingers stilled. "Because when my brother died, she said, 'Everyone told me to be strong, to move on, to trust the system. No one sat with me in the silence after. No one stayed once the machine stopped.'" Daniel swallowed. "I can't fix what happened to him," she continued, "but I can stay when other people want to look away." Daniel stared at her, something raw shifting behind his eyes. For the first time, he understood the risk she posed, not to his children, to him. Because if she was right, then safety was not something he could engineer. It was something he had to endure. The lawsuit hit the front gate before the sun cleared the trees. Daniel was in the East Wing conference room, reviewing overnight data, when Victor Lang entered without knocking his face, stripped of its usual composure. He didn't speak at first. He placed a tablet on the table and turned it so Daniel could see. An emergency injunction. Filed at 6:12 in the morning. Temporary protective order requested. Allegations of unauthorized psychological influence on minors. Daniel read without blinking. The petitioner was a former Harrington biotech consultant, Dr. Raymond Hale, a man Daniel had fired 3 years earlier for falsifying trial data and quietly blacklisted from federal contracts. Hale now claimed to be acting in the best interest of the children, citing emotional dependency boundary violations and negligent supervision. Grace Monroe's name appeared 16 times. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Has requesting immediate removal," Victor said. "And court-ordered evaluation of the household." Daniel stood. "On what grounds?" "He alleges undue influence by an unlicensed staff member, resulting in behavioral changes." Silence. Regression. Emotional withdrawal. Daniel almost smiled. "Is using my own language," Daniel said. Victor nodded grimly. "Media picked it up 30 minutes ago. If this goes public, it won't stay about your children. It'll become about your company, about whether your models can detect psychological risk when you couldn't in your own home." Daniel walked to the glass wall and looked out over the property. Security vehicles moved into position without being told. Somewhere inside the house, the boys were waking up. "Bring Grace here," Daniel said. "Now." Grace arrived, flanked by legal counsel she hadn't requested and didn't seem to want. She stood in the center of the room, hands, clasped eyes alert but calm. "They're trying to remove me," she said, before anyone else could speak. "Yes," Daniel replied. Grace nodded once. Then they'll try to make this about you. Daniel studied her. You knew this would happen. I hoped it wouldn't. I expected it would. Why didn't you warn me? Because you wouldn't have listened until it mattered. Victor exhaled sharply. Daniel turned to the legal team. Leave us. Sir, one of them began. Now. The room emptied the door, sealing shut, with a soft hydraulic sigh. Grace looked around. This is where you decide whether you still want me here. Daniel crossed his arms. This is where I decide whether to fight. Grace's gaze sharpened. Those are not the same thing. Explain. If you fight for me, she said, you turn me into the issue. If you fight for them, you change the question entirely. Daniel felt the familiar pull toward strategy framing control. They're attacking my credibility as a parent, he said. No, Grace replied. They're attacking your fear. Silence settled. You built a system so no one could question you, she continued. Now someone is, and you're deciding whether to prove them wrong or confirm them. Daniel turned away, anger simmering beneath his restraint. You think this is simple? No, she said. I think it's inevitable. He faced her again. You are the reason this is happening. Grace did not flinch. I am the reason it's visible. That was it. Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. All right, he said. Then we do this my way. Grace tilted her head. Which way is that? Daniel's eyes hardened. I let them come. Grace's breath caught. You what I open the house. I allow evaluation, independent observers, full transparency. That's insane. Victor's voice cut in from the doorway before Daniel realized he'd re-entered. Daniel didn't turn. Insane is pretending this will go away. Grace stared at him. They'll dissect everything. Good, Daniel said. Let them see. Grace's voice dropped. They'll see you losing control. Daniel met her gaze. Then maybe they'll finally see me telling the truth. The evaluation team arrived by noon. 2 child psychologists, 1 federal observer, 1 family court liaison. Cameras were disabled at Daniel's insistence. Notes were taken by hand. Every movement scrutinized. Miles clung to the blue cloth. Caleb stayed between him and the strangers, shoulders squared. Grace remained at the edge of the room, silent unless spoken to. Do you feel pressured by her presence? One evaluator asked Caleb. Caleb considered. No. Do you feel safer when she's here? Caleb nodded. Why, because she doesn't make me explain, he said. The evaluator paused. Miles was asked next. His voice was small but steady. She doesn't tell me to be brave. She just stays until I am. Daniel felt something in his chest give way. And your father, the evaluator asked gently, how does he make you feel? Miles hesitated, then looked at Daniel. Like, I need to be okay faster. Daniel closed his eyes. Grace did not look at him. By late afternoon, the team withdrew to deliberate. Victor paced. This could go either way. Grace sat on the floor back against the wall, eyes closed. Why aren't you afraid? Daniel asked quietly. Grace opened her eyes. I am. Then why stay so calm? Because fear doesn't need more noise. A message arrived on Daniel's phone. Private number. He didn't answer. Another followed. And another. Finally, the court liaison returned. Based on preliminary findings, she said, we are not recommending removal at this time. However, continued involvement will require defined boundaries and parental participation. Daniel nodded. Agreed. Grace exhaled slow and controlled. That evening, as the house settled into a new, uncertain quiet, Daniel found himself in the boys' room again. No cameras, no monitors, just the soft hum of the building and the steady breathing of his sons. Grace stood in the doorway waiting. Daniel turned to her. You could still leave, he said. No one would blame you. Grace shook her head. I didn't come here to be safe. Daniel swallowed. Neither did I, he said. For the first time, Grace smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just real. Outside, the world was already forming opinions, headlines, narratives, judgment. Inside the house, something far more dangerous was happening. Daniel Harrington was learning that control could be challenged, authority could be questioned, and love could not be audited. And he had never been more exposed. The first real failure did not come from the children. It came from Daniel. He missed a board call at 9:40 in the morning, the kind that moved markets when he spoke and rattled confidence when he did not. Victor knocked once, then again, then finally opened the door to Daniel's office and found him sitting on the floor, back against the wall, listening to nothing but his own breathing. Sir Victor said carefully, "They're waiting." Daniel did not look up. "Cancel it." Victor froze. "Cancel the board call." "Yes, sir, this is not the priority." Victor stared at him, recalculating the rules of the universe in real time. Daniel Harrington did not cancel. He dominated. He controlled. He arrived early and left last. He did not sit on floors. He did not listen to silence like it might speak back. Victor nodded once and backed out. Daniel remained where he was. The house felt different now, not quieter, exposed, like the walls had thinned without his permission. The absence of cameras created blind spots he could feel in his spine. Every instinct in him screamed to reassert control, to replace uncertainty with data, to reinstall the eyes he had trusted more than his own judgment. Instead, he stayed still. Down the hall, Miles coughed in his sleep. Not a dangerous sound, just a reminder. Daniel flinched anyway, then forced himself not to move. Grace's words surfaced uninvited. Fear doesn't need more noise. He hated how right she was. By mid-morning, the fallout began. An analyst leaked part of the injunction filing. Headlines followed within minutes. Billionaire CEO under scrutiny. Experimental parenting. Unlicensed caregiver controversy. Commentators filled the gaps with speculation dressed as concern. Daniel watched none of it. He stood in the kitchen while Grace prepared tea for the boys, her movements unhurried, precise. She did not ask for permission. She did not explain herself. She simply worked as if this space had always been meant to include her. "You're not going to answer them," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. They'll interpret that as guilt. Let them." Grace studied him. "You're choosing the children over the narrative." Daniel met her gaze. Choosing the truth over control." She nodded once, approving, but not surprised. Late afternoon brought the second failure. Miles refused his treatment. Not violently, not dramatically. He simply closed his mouth and turned his head away when the nurse approached. His small hand tightened around the blue cloth knuckles, whitening. "Miles," the nurse coaxed, "we need to do this now." "No," he whispered. Caleb stepped forward. He doesn't want to be touched. Daniel felt the familiar urge to intervene, to override, to make the decision for them. He stopped himself. Grace crouched beside Miles, not close enough to crowd him, not far enough to abandon him. "What are you worried will happen?" she asked. Milet's voice trembled. "It'll make me disappear." The room stilled. "Disappear, how?" Grace asked. Miles swallowed. "Like when everyone talks and nobody hears me anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. Grace looked at the nurse. "Can we give him a minute?" Protocol says Daniel raised a hand. "Give him a minute." The nurse hesitated, then stepped back. Grace waited. She did not fill the space. She let the silence stretch until it softened on its own. "I won't disappear," Miles said finally. "Will I?" Grace shook her head. "No, you're here. And we see you." Miles nodded. He took the treatment. Daniel turned away before anyone could see his face. That night, the real confrontation arrived. Daniel found Grace in the library, standing in front of a wall of books she had no clearance to touch. She was not reading. She was tracing the spines with her fingers slow and thoughtful, like someone counting breaths. "You crossed another boundary," Daniel said. Grace did not turn around. "I didn't touch anything. You're not authorized in this room." She faced him then. "Neither are my memories, but they show up anyway." Daniel's jaw tightened. "This is not about you, isn't it?" Grace asked. He closed the distance between them, stopping just short of invading her space. "You're changing the center of gravity in this house," he said. "People are confused. My staff, my company, my children." Grace met his gaze. "And you." Daniel felt the truth of it land hard. "I don't know who I am without control," he said quietly. Grace's voice softened. "Then maybe this is where you find out." Daniel laughed, bitter. "You make it sound noble." "I make it sound survivable." He turned away, hands braced on the table. "I built my life on certainty. And certainty failed you," Grace said. Daniel spun back. "So what do you suggest, that I sit in fear and call it growth?" "No," she said. "I suggest you sit in fear and call it honesty." Silence fell between them, heavy and unguarded. "You know what they'll say if this goes wrong," Daniel said. "They'll say I was negligent, weak, that I let sentiment override responsibility." Grace nodded. "They will. And you're still here?" "Yes." Why, Grace's eyes dropped to the floor. "Because when my brother was dying, everyone left the room when the machines took over. They said it was kinder, more professional. I stayed. And I don't regret that. Not even when it broke me." Daniel swallowed. "You don't think staying will break you again?" Grace looked up. "It already did. I'm just done running from it." The next morning, the twist arrived without warning. A call from Daniel's general counsel. Urgent. Federal. Daniel took it in the hall outside the boys' room. Voice low. "What do you mean reopened the trial? The one hail falsified." A whistleblower came forward overnight, with evidence. Time-stamped. Authenticated. Daniel's pulse spiked. "Who?" There was a pause. Grace Monroe. Daniel closed his eyes. She had not told him. The case would dismantle Hale's credibility completely. Expose the injunction as retaliation. Shift the narrative overnight. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. Grace stood at the end of the hall, watching him. Expression unreadable. "You did this," he said. She nodded. "I didn't want to be protected. I wanted the truth protected. You could have told me. I needed to know you'd choose the children, even if it cost you everything else." Daniel stared at her, something fierce and unfamiliar burning in his chest. "You risked everything." Grace's voice was steady. "So did you." In that moment, Daniel Harrington understood the final, terrifying truth. Grace Monroe was not the liability. She was the mirror. And the man staring back at him was no longer powerful because he controlled the world. He was powerful because he was finally willing to lose it. The house woke up to a different kind of quiet. Not the enforced silence of protocols and padded doors, but the tentative calm that follows a storm when no one is sure what survived. Daniel stood at the kitchen window before dawn, hands wrapped around a mug he had not yet lifted, watching fog drift low across the garden. His phone lay face down on the counter. He had not checked the news. He already knew what it would say. "Whistleblower disrupts federal case. Disgraced scientists, claims collapse. CEO vindicated." Vindicated was the wrong word. Behind him, footsteps moved softly. Grace entered without announcement, hair loosely tied back, no uniform this time. Just jeans and a sweater. She paused when she saw him, as if recalculating her presence. You didn't sleep, she said. Daniel didn't turn. Neither did you. She smiled faintly. No. They stood there together, not touching the space between them, charged with everything that had not yet been said. The boys woke an hour later. Miles shuffled into the kitchen, wrapped in the blue cloth, eyes half-closed, hair sticking up at odd angles. Caleb followed already, alert scanning faces, cataloging moods. When he saw Grace, he stopped. You stayed, he said. Grace nodded. I did. Caleb studied Daniel. You let her. Daniel met his son's gaze. Yes. Caleb considered this, then nodded once. Decision made. They ate breakfast at the table instead of the floor. It wasn't dramatic, no speeches, just cereal toast and the quiet clink of silverware. Miles laughed once when milk spilled, and no one reacted. The sound startled them all. Later, the house filled with visitors, lawyers first, advisors, crisis consultants. Daniel did not ask for and did not fire. They hovered waiting for direction. Daniel gave none. I am stepping back, he told them calmly. Not from the company, from the narrative. They stared at him like he'd spoken another language. You don't manage a situation like this by disappearing, one of them protested. I'm not disappearing, Daniel said. I'm prioritizing. Grace watched from the doorway, silent. By midday, the boys were restless. Not anxious. Bored. Can we go outside? Miles asked. The garden was usually scheduled, timed, controlled for light and exposure. Daniel hesitated. Grace didn't speak. She waited. Yes, Daniel said finally. We can. They stepped into the sunlight together. Miles shielded, but smiling Caleb, already racing ahead. Fireflies clung to the tall grass from the night before, stubbornly slow to leave. The air smelled of earth and possibility. Daniel stood back, watching. Grace moved to adjust Mila's collar, then stopped herself. She waited for him to ask. He did. The moment passed, like a quiet victory. That afternoon, Daniel received the call he had been avoiding. His board chair, old, sharp, unamused. You've destabilized investor confidence, she said, without preamble. Daniel listened. You've turned a contained situation into a referendum on your leadership. Daniel looked through the window at his sons running unafraid. Yes, he said. Silence crackled on the line. You're not backing down. No. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, a sigh. Your father would have done the same thing she said. Daniel closed his eyes. His father had died before the boys were born, a man of quiet principles and stubborn decency. Thank you, Daniel said. The call ended. As evening fell, Grace found Daniel in the library again. This time, he was sitting on the floor, a book open, but unread in his hands. You can stay here, he said without looking up. Grace leaned against the doorframe. I know. No, Daniel said. I mean, stay. Not provisionally, not until the next crisis. Stay. Grace stepped inside. Her voice was careful. That's not something you offer lightly. I know. She crossed the room slowly. What happens when it hurts again? Daniel met her gaze. Then, we hurt honestly. Grace sat down across from him. You don't promise safety anymore? No, he said. I promise presence. She considered this, then nodded. That night, Miles had another dream. Not a nightmare. Something in between. He woke quietly, breathing fast, but steady. Caleb stirred beside him. Grace was there before Daniel realized he'd moved. She sat on the floor back against the bed and waited. Daniel joined them, sitting awkwardly, uncertain, untrained in this posture. Miles whispered, Are you scared too? Daniel answered before Grace could. Yes. Miles blinked, then smiled. Okay. They sat together until the fear loosened its grip. No words, no fixes, just breathing in the same space. When the boys slept again, Grace stood. Daniel didn't stop her. At the door she paused. "You didn't ask me why I came forward?" she said. Daniel shook his head. "I know why." She watched him. "Say it anyway." Daniel took a breath. "Because you were done letting powerful men rewrite what happened. And because you wanted my children protected by truth, not silence." Grace's eyes shone, but she didn't cry. "Yes," she said. She left the room quietly. Daniel remained listening to the steady breathing of his sons. The world outside the walls was already moving on hungry for the next scandal, the next failure. Inside the house, something fragile and defiant had taken root. For the first time, Daniel Harrington was not managing risk. He was learning to live with it. And in that unguarded space, something like peace began to form, not as a guarantee, but as a choice made again and again, one honest moment at a time. 6 months later, the house no longer felt like a command center. Daniel noticed it first in the small things. Doors left open without alarms chiming. Windows unshaded in the early morning light, spilling in unevenly instead of being filtered into obedience. The air still cycled clean, still measured. But it moved more freely now, as if the building itself had relaxed. Half the cameras were gone, not broken, removed. Daniel had ordered it himself one quiet afternoon, signing off on the decommissioning list without ceremony. Corridor feeds first, then common rooms. Finally the boys' bedroom monitors. The last ones had taken the longest. His hand had hovered over the confirmation panel for a full minute before he pressed approve. Terrifying. Necessary. Miles was 7 now, taller, stronger. His body still fragile, but no longer treated like it might shatter at a touch. He wore protective clothing when needed, but he ran. He laughed. He argued. He complained about vegetables like any other child. The blue cloth still followed him, but now it lived folded on a chair instead of clenched in his fists. Caleb had changed too. He spoke more, not loudly, not impulsively, but with a steady confidence that made adults pause. He asked questions that didn't seek reassurance, only understanding. He no longer positioned himself between Miles and the world by default. He trusted that someone else would step in when needed. Daniel watched this shift with awe and unease, because it had not come from control. Grace moved through the house differently now. She still arrived early, still left late, but she no longer disappeared into corners. She sat at the table during breakfast. She spoke when spoken to, and sometimes when silence needed interruption. The staff treated her with a quiet respect that did not require explanation. Victor noticed it too. "She's not staff anymore," he said one evening as they watched the boys build a lopsided structure out of couch cushions. "No," Daniel agreed. "She's not." "Then what is she?" Daniel considered the question longer than Victor expected. "She's someone who stayed," he said. That night, Daniel received another call. This one from the past, his former in-laws. The parents of the woman he had loved and lost. He hadn't spoken to them in years. Not since he'd convinced himself that distance was protection, that grief was contagious. They'd seen the news. They'd read between the lines. "Wed'd like to visit her mother," said voice, cautious but hopeful. Daniel felt the old fear rise, the one that whispered that memories were dangerous, that reopening old doors invited pain. "Yes," he said anyway, "come." When they arrived 2 weeks later, the house held its breath again, but this time in anticipation, not dread. Grace stood back as Daniel greeted them, letting him lead, letting him falter, letting him find his footing. It was awkward, emotional, honest. They cried in the living room, laughed in the kitchen, told stories about their daughter that Daniel had locked away for too long. The boys listened wide-eyed, discovering their mother not as a tragedy, but as a person who had existed fully. That night, Daniel stood alone in the garden, staring at the sky. Grace joined him without a word. "I forgot how much it hurts to remember her," Daniel said. Grace nodded. "And how much it hurts not to." They stood in silence, the darkness no longer threatening, just vast. Later that week, another shift came. Karen's replacement resigned, not in protest, not in anger. "I don't think I belong here anymore," she said gently. "This place doesn't need what I'm good at." Daniel accepted her resignation with gratitude. The new operations manager arrived a month later, younger, less rigid, more curious than cautious. She asked questions that began with, "How does this feel?" instead of, "Is this allowed?" The house adapted. So did Daniel. He no longer started his mornings in the control room. He ate breakfast with his sons. He walked them to the garden. He listened when Caleb spoke, even when the words unsettled him. Especially then. One evening, Miles asked a question that stopped him cold. "Dad," he said, "do you still think I'm broken?" Daniel felt his chest tighten. "No," he said carefully. "I think you're different. And that difference matters." Miles nodded, satisfied. Grace watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Later, when the boys were asleep, Daniel found her folding the blue cloth. Once, twice, 3 times. "You don't have to do that anymore," he said. Grace smiled softly. "Habits don't vanish just because they're no longer necessary." He leaned against the counter. "Neither does fear." "No," she agreed. "But it changes shape." Daniel hesitated, then spoke the thought that had been forming for weeks. "What happens if you leave someday?" Grace looked at him, not startled, not defensive. "Then you'll keep going," she said. "So will they." "That's the point." Daniel studied her. "You're not afraid of being needed. I'm afraid of being the only thing someone leans on." He nodded. "Me too." They stood there, 2 people who had learned the cost of isolation and the risk of connection. Outside, the boys' laughter drifted through an open window, unfiltered and alive. Daniel closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. The world had not become safer. The future had not become predictable. But something else had changed. He was no longer trying to outsmart loss. He was choosing to face it, eyes open, hands empty, heart exposed. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Harrington understood that this was not weakness. It was strength of the rarest kind. The first thing Daniel Harrington noticed that morning was the absence of alarms. No soft chime marking transitions. No automated reminders nudging the house from one controlled state to another. Just birds somewhere beyond the glass and the low hum of life moving forward without permission or instruction. He stood at the kitchen counter, tying his tie fingers slower than they used to be, movements less rehearsed. The mirror reflected a man who still carried authority in his posture, still held power in the set of his shoulders, but whose eyes no longer scanned for threats first. They lingered instead on small human details. Miles sat at the table, struggling with a stubborn shoelace tongue pressed between his teeth in concentration. Caleb leaned over without being asked, and helped, not hovering, not correcting, just steadying the lace until it gave way. When they looked up and caught Daniel watching, neither of them froze. They smiled. Breakfast was loud, milk spilled. Milk. Someone laughed too hard. Someone else complained. Grace sat at the table with them, not as an anchor, not as a shield, just as another adult present in the mess of living. She listened more than she spoke. She always had. Daniel realized then that the house no longer felt like something he owned. It felt like something he belonged to. Later that afternoon, he stood in the old control room for the last time. The walls were bare now. Screens removed, wires capped. What had once been the heart of his fortress was quiet and unremarkable, reduced to a clean, empty space waiting to be repurposed. Victor hovered in the doorway. "You're really shutting it down," Victor said. Daniel nodded. "I don't need it anymore." Victor hesitated. "The market still thinks you're invincible." Daniel smiled faintly. "Let them." He signed the final authorization and handed it back without ceremony. No dramatic speech, no declaration, just a choice made and lived with. That evening, the garden filled with golden light as the sun dipped low. Miles chased fireflies carefully, learning how to catch without crushing. Caleb narrated the rules he invented as he went confident and certain. Grace sat on the grass nearby Hans, resting loosely in her lap, the blue cloth folded and set aside, no longer needed but not discarded. Daniel joined her, lowering himself onto the ground with a quiet exhale. "You know they won't always be okay," Grace said softly. Daniel nodded. "I know, and you won't always know what to do. I know that too." She glanced at him. "You're all right with that now?" Daniel watched his sons move through the light, imperfect and alive. "I am." They sat in companionable silence as the day faded. No fear crept in, no urgent need to secure the moment, just the acceptance that it would pass and that he would be there when it did. Later, when the boys were asleep, Daniel stood in the doorway of their room. No cameras, no monitors. Just the slow rhythm of breathing and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, he would meet it awake. Grace paused beside him. "You stayed," she said. Daniel looked at her. "So did you." She nodded, satisfied. That night, the Harrington estate rested, not because it was controlled, but because it was trusted. Walls did not watch. Systems did not judge. People listened. People stayed. People lived with the risk and found meaning there instead of fear. Daniel Harrington had once believed that power meant preventing loss. He knew better now. Power was choosing presence over protection, honesty over illusion, love over control, even when the outcome was uncertain. If this story moved you, take a moment to like and subscribe, and leave a comment with 3 simple words. Share your story,